Good friends and members of our team. BC has been a second home to me all my life, and it's also a moment that lends itself naturally and through extraordinary hard work and commitment by a lot of British Columbians for big environmental announcements like we're making today. The Globe Forum here in Vancouver has been leading for decades now on bringing together the economy and the environment in a magnificent setting. And I'm really glad that we were able to launch our emissions reduction plan here today. This is an important moment as people come together to drive our next steps on climate action. So it's so good to be joined here today by our Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, as well as Minister Wilkinson and parts of our amazing BC team here who've been leading on everything from transit to old growth forests to continued environmental leadership and stewardship. So thank you all. Et merci Stephen. Aujourd'hui, on a publié notre plan de réduction des émissions. C'est un plan qui répond aux besoins des Canadiens, de l'air pur, de bons emplois, une économie forte et des possibilités d'emploi dans chaque secteur. Now, the biggest contributor to emissions is, of course, the oil and gas sector in this country. So we put down a clear track for where the sector needs to go. Emission cuts of a little over 30% compared to 2005, with a little over 40% emission cuts compared to where we are today. This will guide us as we develop our plan to cap and cut emissions from the oil and gas sector. Bien sûr, pendant qu'on bâtit un avenir plus propre, on va toujours être là pour les travailleurs. On a investi dans les projets qui vont créer des emplois, y compris des projets de construction de réseaux de transport en commun et des projets de modernisation. Other elements of our plan include our plan to create jobs and keep air clean by making life more easier and affordable for the middle class. We're bringing in new mandatory ZEV sales targets of 20% by 2026 and 60% of all new personal vehicles sold in Canada will be zero emission by 2030. This goes with the rebate for ZEVs, for chargers across the country. We're continuing to power people's lives with clean electricity, with hundreds of millions of dollars more for projects, and $1 billion to help farmers adopt more sustainable practices. All of this is on top of historic investments to harness the power of nature to absorb and store emissions and fight climate change. This protects the nature that British Columbians and Canadians love so much. I spent a lot of time here over the years, hiking, paddling, sailing, cycling. I know how committed British Columbians and indeed all Canadians are to protecting this magnificent landscape, but also building the kind of prosperity that can ensure a good present for us all, but a good future for all of our kids. It's 2022, and there's no doubt delivering climate action is part of creating jobs and making life more affordable for everyone. Notre plan de réduction des émissions est la prochaine étape qui va nous permettre de bâtir un avenir solide pour tous les Canadiens pour les décennies à venir. Avant de terminer, je veux prendre évidemment un moment pour parler de l'Ukraine. Hier, j'ai eu encore un appel avec le président Zelensky. On a parlé de la situation sur le terrain et des prochaines étapes pour l'aide humanitaire, économique et militaire. It's critical that Putin and the Russian regime be held to account. The RCMP will support the International Criminal Court's investigation of Russia's alleged war crimes and undertake their own investigation under Canada's Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes program. We will keep doing everything we can to support the people of Ukraine. Merci beaucoup. Je suis très content maintenant de passer la parole au ministre Guilbeault. Stephen.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Thank you for joining us all. As the Prime Minister outlined, we've taken a big step forward today towards our 2030 emissions reduction target. Aujourd'hui, nous avons présenté une feuille de route crédible et réalisable, conçue pour donner un élan à l'échelle nationale, afin que chaque secteur et chaque région, chaque travailleur canadien et chaque ménage puissent contribuer à la transition vers un avenir respectueux de l'environnement, durable et prospère. Along the way, we've committed to cutting Canada's emissions by 40 to 45% by 2030. We've laid out a plan to get there that builds on the hard work that's already been done and sets course for the better days to come. Le Canada s'est joint à plus de 70 pays, dont tous les autres pays du G7, qui se sont engagés à devenir carboneutres d'ici 2050. Des centaines de villes dans le monde ont également pris un engagement dans ce sens, notamment Vancouver, Hamilton, Toronto, Montréal et Halifax. I cannot stress enough that this is a global competition. With our natural resources, our skilled workforce, and our strong financial system, Canada stands to benefit substantially by increasing our climate ambition. We've been through more than 2 years of pandemic lockdowns, international conflict, misinformation wars, but the climate crisis will still be with us when other crises have passed. So we have to redouble our efforts. Et le plan que nous avons présenté aujourd'hui est articulé autour de communautés plus résilientes, de l'électricité fiable et abordable, de bons emplois, de l'air pur et une économie forte. Des véhicules zéro émission au secteur pétrolier et gazier, en passant par l'industrie lourde, l'agriculture, la nature, les bâtiments à haut rendement énergétique et les déchets municipaux, chaque région et chaque secteur ont un rôle à jouer pour atteindre les cibles climatiques que s'est fixé le Canada pour 2030. Canadians just need to grab the reins, have the guts and the brains and the foresight to drive investment that support emission reduction, create economic opportunities, and support workers. This is our opportunity to ramp it up, to work together as a country for a healthier environment, and to diversify our economy and create sustainable jobs for generations to come. Très heureux de repasser la parole au Premier ministre pour la période des questions. Merci.
Ministre, on a 20 minutes pour des questions. One question, one follow-up per reporter, please. Identify your outlet and your name. We'll start with the first question. First question at this mic, yes.
Hi, Andrea McPherson, Global News. With the emissions plan, how can you call this a complete plan when there are no specific caps for the oil and gas sector?
We know that we need to take steps right across the economy. We've been putting forward significant targets for a number of years now that we've demonstrated with the price on pollution, with other measures that we move towards. We continue to invest in green technologies and in decarbonization programs, but now we're laying out a clear emissions reductions plan that involves all the heavy polluting sectors of the economy, and the oil and gas sector will have to reduce its emissions by over 30% from 2005 levels and over 40% from today's levels, which is a significant responsibility and lift for them to do, but it's also something that I know our engineers and workers in the oil and gas sector are going to be able to do as we move towards a better future and better jobs. But on the aspect of the consultations that we will be having with the oil and gas sector, I'll turn the floor over to Minister Wilkinson. Jonathan.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for the question. So the plan contains, as you will have seen, sectoral projections for all of the sectors of the economy, including the oil and gas sector. Those are built upon some of the actions that we have already taken and committed to take, such as the methane reduction, such as the clean fuel standards. It also relates to the cap and cut, which we promised in the last campaign. That cap is in the process of being developed. We committed to the sector that we would work with them on a collaborative basis to establish the cap, and that is what we intend to do. I would draw people's attention to the fact that it was the oil sands pathways companies that actually made the commitment to net zero by 2050 some time ago. This is a step along the way, and we will be working with them over the coming months to ensure we put in place an appropriate cap that's going to work in a manner that will actually continue to employ people, but that will allow us to get at those emissions. And as I say, the sectoral projections essentially incorporate our views about what is achievable with respect to the cap and the other measures.
Follow up? Next question.
Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News. Following up on the idea of the fossil fuel industry, why make the call to hold oil and gas to just over 30% instead of going the full way and having them go over 40% as the rest of the economy is?
We lost 10 years on our path to 2030 because for 10 years, under the Harper Conservatives, nothing got done on fighting climate change, on reducing emissions from the oil and gas sector, on preparing for the future that everyone saw clearly was coming. And that's why the work we have to do, yes, is ambitious, but is also realizable. We're going to reach that 40% cut in Canada's emissions by asking all different sectors, including oil and gas, to be incredibly ambitious and concrete in their ability to do that. This is the plan that's going to get us to net zero by 50 and 40% by 2030.
Still special rules, though, right? Different cap for a different industry?
Different sectors have different expectations. The transportation sector has a pact. The agricultural sector, we're asking our electricity sector to cut massively with much higher than 40% because that's what they're able to do. We know that there are different challenges in different sectors of the economy, and what we've done with this plan is calibrate it so it is as ambitious as necessary, but also doable, because Canadians have had far too long of targets that have been set but not achieved. It is time we all stepped up with a real concrete plan that's going to get us to 40% by 30 and net zero by 2050, and this is that plan.
Next question.
Benoît Ferradini, Radio-Canada. Même thème, on dirait que vous ménagez l'industrie pétrolière, 31% au lieu de 40% en général. Pourquoi est-ce que vous n'êtes pas plus contraignant envers ce secteur? Pourquoi il y a une limite de production au lieu de négocier un plafond?
On sait que différents secteurs ont différentes réalités pour des réductions et ce plan reconnaît la réalité du Canada. Mais c'est un plan concret qui va arriver aux 40% de réduction dont on a besoin en 2030 pour être à net zéro en 2050. On en demande énormément à l'industrie pétrolière, on en demande énormément à tous les différents secteurs de l'économie parce que nous devons de faire le travail difficile pour transformer notre économie au complet. Et je dois souligner que c'est plus difficile que ce que ça aurait été si pendant 10 ans, on n'avait pas eu un gouvernement conservateur qui a refusé de faire quoi que ce soit pour réduire les émissions dans le secteur pétrolier, mais à travers l'économie. Donc oui, ça va exiger du gros travail, mais nous sommes capables de le faire. Stephen, voulais-tu ajouter là-dessus?
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. En fait, je vous invite à prendre le temps de lire l'analyse sur laquelle reposent les objectifs des différents secteurs. Donc, ce ne sont pas des chiffres qu'on a sortis d'un chapeau, mais ça repose sur une analyse détaillée à la fois du ministère de l'Environnement, du ministère des Ressources naturelles, du ministère des Finances, du ministère des Transports, de l'Innovation. Et comme le Premier ministre l'a souligné, certains secteurs, le secteur de l'électricité va réduire de 87 % les émissions d'ici 2030, alors qu'à l'opposé, le secteur de l'agriculture ne va réduire que d'1 % parce que les enjeux ne sont pas les mêmes. La rapidité avec laquelle on peut déployer des mesures, que ce soit des mesures technologiques dans le cas de l'agriculture, des changements à certaines pratiques agricoles, font en sorte qu'on ne pouvait pas simplement prendre un chiffre et dire ça va être le même chiffre pour tout le monde. C'est impossible d'avoir une approche comme ça, compte tenu de la diversité des secteurs. Et vous verrez que le secteur des transports, par exemple, est à 14 % de réduction d'ici 2030 parce que nous sommes en train de déployer, comme le premier ministre le précisait, une loi zéro émission qui nous amènera à 100 % des ventes de véhicules en 2035, mais nous n'y sommes pas encore en 2030. Donc, nous avons eu une approche très pragmatique par rapport à chaque secteur qui était basée sur la science et sur l'analyse. Merci.
Question de suivi?
Follow-up?
Oui.
Vous parlez aujourd'hui de 40 %, vous avez parlé de 40 à 45 % auparavant. Est-ce que la différence va être demandée aux provinces? Et si oui, concrètement, comment allez-vous le faire?
On a mis de l'avant un plan pour atteindre le 40 % de réduction, mais on sait qu'avec les innovations à venir, avec le travail que nous allons tous faire ensemble, on peut et on doit aller plus loin. Et ça va préparer le terrain pour que justement on puisse continuer. Nos objectifs étaient de 40 à 45 %. Le fait qu'on a un plan extrêmement ambitieux qui nous amène jusqu'à 40 pour 2030, c'est un très bon début, mais on a encore, comme on le sait, beaucoup de travail à faire dans les années à venir pour continuer la lutte contre les changements climatiques.
Prochaine question, next question.
Hi, Nick Wells with the Canadian Press. Your government's relationship with the oil and gas sector has been strained, to say the least. And now you have a report saying they need to cut emissions more by 2030. Is this really feasible without forcing production to go down?
We have spoken extensively with leaders in the oil and gas sector who actually themselves recognize the need to get to net zero by 50. The oil and gas sector has laid that out. These are plans that are consistent with that objective that they have themselves laid out, and we see the innovations and the leadership that the energy sector across Canada is investing in renewables with, is moving towards cleaner technologies. Canada is in many cases leading the world on cutting-edge technologies that are going to be essential to reach global net zero by 2050 or in the thereabouts. So Canadian workers, Canadian engineers are going to be central to developing those solutions, and a lot of them are right now in the oil patch and in the oil sector, and I know they love their kids just as much as any of the rest of us. They want to build a strong and protected future for all of us while they create those innovations that we're going to have. Canadians are united on knowing that this is where the future is going and that we can get there all together.
Follow up, Nick?
Yeah, changing tack slightly, just on the Ukraine situation. The UK and Russia talks are showing signs of progress. What do you think about Ukraine's proposal to become, quote, neutral and not join NATO? And what role do you see for Canada in being security guarantor for Ukraine?
As you know, I spoke with President Zelensky yesterday and we discussed these issues. The bottom line is Canada will continue to be there to support Ukraine and stand against Russia every step of the way. We're in talks with allies and partners in NATO and elsewhere about how the best path forward is on that. But Canadians can know that Canada will be there to support Ukraine and to push back against Russia as long as it takes until Russia realizes the depths of the error they made, the miscalculation, and the horrificness of their illegal invasion of Ukraine.
Next question, please.
You acknowledge, or I should say, Tyler Orton, Glacier Media. You acknowledged earlier today Canadians facing higher food prices, energy prices amid global uncertainty right now. We're seeing lockdowns in Shanghai. We know that means more supply chain disruptions. What are average Canadians supposed to do right now? Inflation is not abating. A lot of uncertainty.
We've seen from the global pandemic to the war in Ukraine, significant disruptions of supply chains around the world, which is resulting in higher prices for consumers in democracies like ours, and resulting in significant shortages and projected shortages of food, of energy in places around the world. This is going to be a difficult time because of the war, because of the recovery from the pandemic, and Canadians will do what we always do. We'll be there for each other. We will continue to be there for the world, even as we support each other through these difficult times. And that's why, for example, I was so pleased to make the announcement yesterday that after BC led on it so many months ago, we now have a national early learning and childcare system on its way for families across the country, with reductions in half of the average cost of childcare this year in every province and territory across this country, and $10 a day childcare within 5 years. That's going to be a significant support to families right now and into the coming years. On top of that, the various income supports and support for families that we continue to work forward are going to be supporting people. Our investments in housing are going to bring down housing costs and increase availability and affordability. We know there are lots of pressures faced by everyone right now. This government will continue to have people's backs.
You mentioned housing affordability right now. We're in Vancouver. It's on top of everyone's minds, but the concern is that we have wages that are not keeping track at all with where inflation is going right now. A lot of concerns among British Columbians, especially other people across Canada. What can we do? I mean, you brought up some of the plans that are in place, but what can Canadians do right now to be, aware of what's going to happen with their housing situation?
Well, we know that it is a good thing that the Canadian economy has bounced back faster and stronger than many other jurisdictions after this pandemic. Job creation is up. There's labor shortages in many places around the country. We're seeing a bounce back in our economy that is extremely strong, but it is also having an impact on higher housing prices. And that's why, without giving away too many details, I can assure you that investments in housing for here in the Lower Mainland, but indeed across the country, will be a strong topic in the budget that we will be presenting in the coming weeks.
Next question.
Good morning, Reagan Hasagawa, CTV News. This question from my colleague. How can the Canadian government tell the oil and gas sector to increase production this month because of Ukraine and then tell it to drastically cut emissions by 2030 today?
We've been very clear that we need to reduce emissions. The emissions that contribute to climate change are the focus of this emissions reduction plan. It's a plan to reduce oil and gas sector emissions by over 30% from 2005 levels by 2030, over 40% reduction from where we are today. At the same time, in my conversations with European leaders who've highlighted the crunch they're facing because of the illegal decision by Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine in Europe, and Canada can be helpful not just in the very short term, but also in the medium and long term with the clean energy transition that we are leading on today. These are things that go together, but I'm happy to turn over to Minister Wilkinson, who's been engaged closely with his European counterparts on what that path forward is, short, medium, and long term.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and I'm glad you asked this question. I do think that folks sometimes oversimplify these issues. We have a crisis in Europe. A crisis where Europe is looking to diversify the sources of oil and gas that it gets, primarily from Russia. And it is looking to its allies and its friends, like Canada and like the United States, to help them with ensuring that they can actually achieve greater degree of energy security going forward. I will tell you, in the conversations I had last week in Paris with my counterparts from European countries, they are worried about being able to fill their grocery stores, to have enough diesel to actually drive the trucks that are required. They're worried about having enough gas to be able to heat their homes. And so, of course, Canada is going to step up and do what it can to help our European friends and allies. It would be irresponsible for us to do anything other than that. I would say that with respect to climate change, when you displace Russian oil with Canadian oil or American oil, there's zero increase in carbon emissions with respect to the use of the product. With respect to the production emissions, Canada, of course, has to account for those in the context of achieving our climate plan. We are absolutely committed to doing that. But it's also why, for example, we are reducing methane emissions in the oil and gas sector by 75% to reduce those very production emissions. For those who say we shouldn't help our European friends, I think the vast majority of Canadians would say that's ridiculous. I think for those who would say we should forget about climate change, I would tell you it has not gone away. It remains an existential threat. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to be able to help our European friends and account for all of the various emissions and accelerate the work, as Europe is focused on doing, towards renewables and hydrogen and a clean growth economy.
We have time for one last follow-up.
Prime Minister, this question is about your visit to the Williams Lake First Nation tomorrow. I'm just wondering what you're hoping to accomplish and what resources you are willing to commit to that community.
I very much look forward to going to Williams Lake tomorrow to meet with Chief Willie Sellers and talk about the challenges and hardship that community and so many communities across this country have gone through. The discovery of unmarked graves at residential school sites across this country has highlighted for all Canadians the horrors of our past, for which we all bear a certain responsibility, but it's also reawoken deep, deep wounds and trauma amongst Indigenous peoples. And we need to show that we are there with them, to walk with them on the path of healing and reconciliation, and build a better future for us all. This is something that we are committed to as a government. It's something that I look forward to engaging with the residents of Williams Lake First Nation with tomorrow, because this country will continue its journey on the path of reconciliation hand in hand with Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. That concludes today's press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.